welcome to the Good Leader Podcast live here at Focus 2026. And it's wonderful to invite you into this stretch tent. I'm Will Vanderhart.
I'm Will James.
And today we're really excited to have our first guest, Oz Alashe, with us. Oz, it's brilliant to have you with us in the tent.
Thanks a lot. It's great to be here.
It's lovely to gather people together to talk about leadership here at Focus. And Oz, you've recently become HTB's new churchwarden.
Yes, yeah, I took over in April. We've been at HTB for many years, about 25 years now, and it's an incredible privilege. It's also an opportunity to try to bless the church and to pray and to be part of this incredible thing that God is doing here.
And also, I've known you for about the last 15 years at Onslow Square, HTB, and always been really impressed by your leadership. You have come out of the military, as you know, I'm telling you, but you left the military as Lieutenant Colonel, and you famously were both in the Parachute Regiment and also in the British Special Services. You've now moved into entrepreneurship, I think, this last 9 years working for cyberspace. You want to say a little bit about your leadership journey into the military, what led you into the military, particularly the Para's a famously hard regiment, and we'd love to hear a bit about those sort of early move of your leadership in that space.
Yeah, I always feel a tiny bit of a fraud kind of explaining my leadership journey, because the reality is that I did join the Parachute Regiment, like you said. I went to university and then went to Sandhurst and joined the army. I joined the Parachute Regiment because I happened to walk past a television episode, and I didn't really watch TV that much at the time, and EastEnders was on, and Grant Mitchell was kind of being an idiot and turning over tables, if anyone remembers Grant Mitchell and his checkered backstory, and somebody said, "Why are you being such an idiot?" And he said, "It's because I can't help it, I was in the Paras," and I thought, I'm going to join the Parachute Regiment. And so kind of I found myself at Sandhurst. I joined the Parachute Regiment. It was an incredible time. And as you said, yes, I volunteered to go and join UK Special Forces for a variety of reasons. But again, another incredible opportunity, working with amazing people from up and down our country, and actually across our Commonwealth as it was. And I thought I'd do 3 or 4 years. And after 17 years, Gemma, my wife, she said, "Are you going to get a proper job or what?" And so I decided to leave. And I now run an AI software company, CybSafe. We're in cybersecurity. We are predicting behavior change. We're helping organizations actually positively influence their people's behavior rather than hoping what they're doing is working.
I mentioned to you that my dad particularly was sort of quite anti-employing service personnel, because in his business he was like, well, they've always been told what to do and lack creativity. Your career in the military, I know that's not true, that's my dad's Dutch prejudice, but I know that you had a stellar career in the military. You were in many of the sort of conflicts over that period, including Iraq and Afghanistan. You went on to win an OBE for your services to the military, and you're famously a complex problem solver, so far away from that suggestion that people in the military just take orders and give orders. Tell us a bit about the kind of creativity and the complex problem solving and the nature of good leadership in the military, and is it still a good career for Christian young men and women who might be thinking about it?
I feel like I was incredibly blessed in terms of my service, but also the time of service as well. So I joined the military at a time where, as a nation, we were quite keen on intervening. If you remember, kind of the Blair government at the time, this idea that we would be a force for good, and of course, well documented some decisions and some actions that were taken that to this day are still being questioned, and I think for very good reason. But ultimately, we found ourselves being deployed on a number of occasions, and so I had the opportunity to serve in Afghanistan on a number of occasions, Iraq at the time as well, a number of occasions, Sierra Leone, the Balkans, and other parts of the world. So the reality is that we were busy, and as a leader, and as a young leader as I was then, of course, it was an incredible place to really learn what it meant to lead. I think the military is an incredible place to be if you want to be there. I don't think we should be forcing people into the military, or at least we ideally don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we have to do that. But ultimately, there are lots of young people who would do extremely well in the military. I found that the thing that I got the most out of it was the opportunity to literally serve alongside people from every walk of life, from up and down our country, and many people who often have written off before they find their purpose and they find themselves. there are lots of things that aren't great about the military. Of course there are, like every organisation, but there is so much that is good. And one of those is the focus on leadership. I remember learning or hearing a phrase which has stuck with me, which is that leaders create leaders. If you're a leader and you're not creating other leaders, then you're probably not fulfilling your opportunity and your calling as a leader. And so the whole system within the military is about creating the environment for others to succeed. Again, something that I think is important, and creating the opportunity for other leaders to come forth. And so creativity is an important part. Complex challenges. Any people problem is complex by nature.
Oz, I'm aware that a lot of people that I meet now who are coming out of school, who are in the early years of their career, don't necessarily think of staying somewhere for 17 years. They might have actually quite a clear strategy of, I'm going to try and go to this for a short amount of period of time, and I'm going to try and pick up lessons to advance my career. I'm curious, 17 years in the military, I wonder if there are things that you felt you learned through being there for that period of time that you couldn't have learned if you'd left sooner.
I think there were lots of things that I learned in the military that I benefited from, that kind of compounding investment. But the reality is 17 years makes it sound like you were doing the same thing for 17 years, and that's not really true. Actually, as a commissioned officer, you kind of change jobs every 2.5 years on average, 2 to 2.5 years. So in many ways, yes, it was a 17-year career, but it was actually, gosh, in my particular case, 7 or 8 jobs. The reality is that leadership lessons compound over time, and there aren't many. We were talking about this earlier on. There's no way of simulating leadership. Yeah, those of you who lead, you lead people, and you lead projects, or maybe you lead initiatives, or you lead teams. You don't necessarily get to simulate it. So everything you learn, you effectively learn on the job. The beauty of the military is the investment in leadership is really quite intentional. And I benefited from that over 17 years. And I'm not sure that it's the only place I could have learnt those lessons. I think lots of people get lots of good investment and lots of incredible leaders who've spent no time anywhere near the military. But I benefited from that opportunity.
I picked up, part of the reason I wanted to invite you is I heard you speaking about leadership at the HCB staff team, and that phrase you used, leaders create environments where other people succeed, was such a, I think I went back to my office and all of the team were sort of talking about that, just that one phrase that you offered. Again, it seems surprising when we think about that, when maybe presumptions about the military, where you think, well, the person who's the most senior kind of gets launched out and everyone else does the work to help them do their thing. We can often think that leaders lead from the front and they're always looking outwards. But your sort of reflection on leadership was leaders create environments where other people succeed. And I felt like that feels so powerful, so kingdom orientated, and so inverse to what we might assume. And I'd love you to say a bit more about both how you've seen that work out in your military career, but also in the way you've set up your business.
Well, I guess, the first thing I would say is I think that that's our calling as a leader, to create the environment for other people to succeed. We don't always get it right. By that I mean sometimes you create an environment and maybe people don't succeed in it. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, because sometimes we can be quite hard on ourselves because we have not done that. But the reality is it's not finite. We get the opportunity to go again and to go again and go again. And I saw that time and time again while serving. I can think of the best leaders that I served with or had the opportunity to work with. And most of the things that they did, in essence, were creating the opportunity for those of us who were underneath them in terms of seniority and maybe hierarchy to do what we were there to do. And I think that's our job as a leader. And so I can literally remember he was a company commander at the time. I was a young platoon commander at the time. And we were in an ops room and we were on operations and everything was going a bit wrong. And there was an argument that broke out. And literally the argument was between people who neither was wrong, but both were being quite forceful about what should happen. And I remember him pretending to be asleep. It was ridiculous. He literally sat there, and I actually saw him open his eye and close his eyes again. And it was clear, and I've spoken to him since, and it was clear that he said, they need to work this out. He was creating the environment for other leaders to succeed. He could have stepped in, and quite often as a leader, I think we think that we should sort things. But maybe that's not what you need to do in that moment. There are times where you might need to, but there are many times where you shouldn't, or at least if you do, you rob the opportunity for somebody else to. And so I run a software company now. It's a very different environment, but in many ways exactly the same. Ultimately, my job is to create the environment for other people to succeed. Do we have the funding? Do we have the understanding of the vision? Do we have the resources that we need? Do we have the right people? Do they have the right level of clarity? Not certainty, but clarity. And then, of course, are we going in the right direction?
I wonder if we were to go back in time and be able to find some of the people who served under you in your military career and invited them to come and be a fly on the wall of your office now, what would they see as similar, and is there anything that they would see as different?
Many of them would probably laugh and think, "Oh my goodness, he's still at it. He hasn't learnt, and indeed he needs all the help he can get." And they'd be right, because of course I think as leaders we do need all the help we can get. But I was extremely blessed. Like I said, people from up and down the country, all walks of life. I believe as Christians we have a cheat code. As Christians we have a cheat code. We're called to do everything that we do, not in our power, by our might, but by His Spirit. And so I think one of the things that they would say was relatively consistent is that I recognize that I don't have all the answers. I didn't have all the answers then. I still don't have all the answers now. I think I'm better at some things now, and I'm just as open to learning lots of things as we go. And I think that's really important as a leader, to stay open to learning. In our case, that cheat code means that we don't just have to learn from people around us. We can literally look to Christ and look to the Bible and see how people have done things, or indeed, of course, ask God for help. And I did that on many occasions. I think some of the things they might see as different, I'm probably a little less impatient than I was before. Truth is, I'm probably still a little bit too impatient, but I'm a little less impatient than I was when I first set out. I also, over time, have learned the difference between being kind and being nice. And I think as a leader, it's much more important that you are kind than you are nice. And quite often we confuse those two things together. Sometimes you have to help people see things or understand things that they don't want to see or understand or won't agree with. But that is the kind thing to do. It may not necessarily be the nicest thing at the time, but it's the kind things to do, and it's the right thing to do. And so those are lessons I've learned on the way, and I pray that I'm getting better at it as I go.
We talked a bit earlier about that idea of collaborative leadership, and it feels to me that individualism is still quite rife in the way in which we're educating young people. We're telling them, go off and make your mark, start your own YouTube channel, launch your own business, go and make it on your own. AI is going to probably steal your job anyway. Find a way of you doing it, and you do you, which is the phrase I hear my teenagers discussing at length. You're a very collaborative leader, and I guess your military experience has really built that collaborative approach to the way in which you lead. How has your work in developing a business, been collaborative, and what do you value about collaborative work as a leader?
Interestingly, I think for me, it's not really just the military that has taught me this. I've been, and we are all the product of lots of inputs from people all over our life. I was raised by an incredible woman, my mother, who raised us by herself. She, for me, was maybe the first, and she's still around, so I don't want to talk about her in the past tense. By God's grace, she'll be around for a long time. She's the first role model I got of leadership. What was it to never give up, to truly believe in the mission that you find yourself in her case, work, raising kids in a faith-filled household, etc., etc. I got to see all of that, and whether it's people on the street, people in the church, whether it's people in the military, and indeed my career at the time, and even now, I just get to see all of these examples of great leadership all over the place. I can't think of a time where I have seen anybody solve something particularly challenging on their own. I can't think of one. Yeah. And so I think that's not by mistake. I think that's because to collaborate with others is to be able to do extraordinary things. If you're a leader, therefore, and you're trying to do something that is truly hard, truly challenging, or indeed it may be, in our case, building AI software, some people suggest bordering on lunacy, bringing something into being that didn't exist before. You have to collaborate. And again, back to that point, as a leader, our job is to unlock the gifts in other people and create the environment for those gifts to flourish and deliver.
And as you mentioned a bit earlier, conflict is a core part of collaboration. It's interesting you talked about the officer who sort of closed his eyes when conflict erupted. So, is there a danger within the Christian context? You talked again about kindness, versus that sort of niceness. Is there a danger in the Christian context that we are so nice as to avoid the conflict that we need in order to collaborate in a way that we will solve problems that are important?
It's probably hard for me to answer in any meaningful way because, of course, I'm not working in the church, and indeed I know some people listening to this or watching this or maybe here, you're either working in the church or maybe the charity sector as well. More broadly, I think the fourth sector is often an area that shares many similarities in that way, and it's quite hard, I believe, to have an environment where there can be healthy conflict and it not spill over into unhealthy conflict. Again, it's a real leadership challenge, but it is an important one. There is more than one way to do things. And in many ways, if people aren't disagreeing, then you have to possibly take a step back and ask yourself, have we missed something here? I would argue if, as a leader, you don't find yourself having to make difficult calls, often that's because of a disagreement between people, maybe you don't need a leader if everybody is agreeing. So I don't think we should shy away from conflict. And maybe in the church, maybe people do that sometimes. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised because it happens everywhere, but I don't know. What I would say is that we shouldn't shy away from it. Yeah. There's a difference between not shying away from it and kind of fostering conflict or creating an environment where there's so much friction that there isn't peace, there isn't calm, and people don't respect or care for each other. Those two are not the same thing.
Yeah, so helpful.
So I'd love to invite you to think for a minute around what this leadership moment is asking of you. And so I'm almost dating that as well. And 2026 is where we are right now. I'm thinking about the leadership context that other people listening to this or here in the room with us might be thinking about. If you could go back in time and say, this is a leadership capability that is going to be really important for you in the future and something that you might have invested in with hindsight more than you have, what would you say to that?
I think for me, and this is quite topical for me right now, it's listening, truly listening. I know that this is something that God is working in me on right now, something I know I need to be better at and I'm trying to be better at all the time. And I think it's the more challenging the thing you do is, the more you need to listen. In many ways, I look at what's happening politically and societally right now, and I wish our leaders would truly listen. Not because somebody's going to give them the answer. In fact, the opposite. I actually think they're going to get more versions of the various answers. It's going to become more complicated, but the reality is you make better decisions with better data. And so truly listening is a key leadership skill that I have really benefited from as I get better. In fact, I almost surprised myself. I'm like, gosh, I'm so glad I didn't say anything then, because I heard the thing that meant that when I did say something, it was much, much more useful. And indeed, in my case, it was shorter. I ended up saying less. We ended up doing less because I listened more. Often, I think that people find themselves in environments where they expect the person with the most amount of experience to have the answer, or the people with the most amount of experience. And so sometimes the people who don't have that much experience end up not being heard. Yeah. Our job as leaders is to listen. And we'll find often that the people that we have the privilege of leading, between them we will work out the challenge.
It's really refreshing to hear you say that. I was thinking about the difference between listening to respond versus listening to understand, and so much of our world is sort of based around listening to respond. When have I got a smart answer to give? As soon as this person stops talking, versus actually am I listening and understanding what they're saying. Yeah. It's really encouraging, Oz, to hear you talking about your career, because it is, it's not what everyone would expect in terms of the way, the nature of the forces, the kind of the heroic leader. Our assumptions around that, the way in which you're leading with so much humility and attention, and it's a real blessing. I know you've got this amazing new opportunity, and we have an opportunity to benefit from your leadership in the church as the church warden at HTB. What are you hoping to bring to that role of volunteer leader in a complex, spiritual landscape, as someone who's guiding a movement of churches towards a kingdom ambition?
I happen to take over from an incredible man, Angus Winter, as churchwarden at HTB. And I had the opportunity to work alongside him for many years as a member of the PCC. So I often feel that the church has slightly dipped out. They've lost Angus and got me. And in reality, poor Angus gets me asking him lots of questions all the time. But the truth is, I think as churchwarden, my job is to pray. First and foremost, I think that HTB has no shortage of incredible leaders, not just on staff, not just in clergy, but actually amongst the congregation. And of course, the network of churches that is just amplified. We are, I think, something like 115 churches here this particular weekend, and each with people from all over the country, or actually in some cases other parts of the world, doing incredible things where they are. So another leader isn't the challenge, or isn't the requirement. More prayer, more belief, the willingness to take godly risk so that we can achieve extraordinary things for him. I think that's what God is calling us to do right now. And so I'm excited about playing my part in that. I don't believe that we're ever called to have the answers. Yeah. I believe we're called to be open to listening and working out what needs to be done. And so, we've got a bold vision here as a group of churches. And that vision extends to blessing our nation. And there's some really tough things going on right now. So the question is, what kind of church is God calling us to be right now? Yeah. And I can assure you, it is one where we need to take risk, where we need to pray, and where we need to step out in faith. So I think I get to kind of play a little part in that.
That's amazing. It's really exciting. I'm sure everyone here will agree. Really exciting and really refreshing to hear you lay out a manifesto for a thriving church in a challenging world, and your experience, and we believe God, the way God's shaped you and continues to shape your leadership, is going to be so powerful in the way that's executed in the months ahead. And we're going to pray for you and for Gemma and the family. So we're grateful to you, Oz. Our first guest today, everyone, Oz Alashe. Let's give Oz a really big round of applause.
Thank you.
Well, it's been great to be with you here today in the tent at Focus 2026. I'm Will Vanderhart.
Will James.
Until next time, we'll see you soon. Thanks so much for being with us.